Alright, why we here? I don't really know. Like, I don't know what happened in Chernobyl. I just know that a bomb was dropped. Or was it a bomb that exploded? I don't know. They were messing around with a nuclear bomb. Bro, I don't know what happened in Chernobyl. I just know that folks can't go there because the radiation will kill people. You feel me? But I figure we might as well learn about what happened in Chernobyl. I don't see why not. Chernobyl nuclear explosion disaster.
Hour 0. April 25th, 1986, Chernobyl power plant, located about 2 miles from Pripyat, a small town in northern Ukraine. Just before midnight, the engineer-mechanic Alexander Yevchenko clocks in for his night shift, a shift that will go down on record as one of the most controversial few hours in history, creating a panic that will take over the planet. The mood among the workers is joyful. It's a beautiful night after a sunny day, and the May Day holiday is just around the corner. At home, sleeping in his small apartment, is his wife, Natasha, and his 2-year-old son, Kirill. The family is well taken care of, and although Natasha has some misgivings about the safety of nuclear power, only recently those fears were diminished when she heard a Soviet official on TV saying nuclear meltdowns just don't happen. Or if they do, he said, they might be one every 10,000 years. In just over 24 hours from now, people who Natasha knows will be out on the street looking into the sky at a dazzling laser beam shooting into the stars. At exactly the same time, her husband will be in a party of 4 men who are exposed to deadly amounts of radiation after being sent to assess the damage at Chernobyl's reactor number 4. 3 of them will die in excruciating pain, their bodies destroyed from within. Alexander will survive because he doesn't enter the reactor hall, but only holds a door for his friends. The arm and leg and shoulder that he uses will later turn black. He'll tell Natasha, with what he thinks could be his dying words, that he's been turned into a mutant. Alexander will see things the communist government will want to keep secret. Death by radiation is a monstrous thing to behold, and the Chernobyl power plant disaster will be one of the most monstrous events in world history. At the heart of the matter is a design flaw that the Soviets will not want to admit. What the capitalists can do, they can do just as well, or so they think.
Like a
One
human
thing
error?
you don't want at a nuclear power station is a total shutdown. If that happens, things can heat up, and if an explosion follows, what you have is a massive leakage of deadly radiation. So every reactor at Chernobyl has 3 backup diesel generators that will kick in if power is suddenly lost. The problem is, it takes 60 to 75 seconds for them to fully power the coolant pumps. The theory, and it's only a theory, is that the slowing turbines after being turned off will create enough electrical power to keep the pumps running during that gap before the generators are running at capacity. To know if this works, they need to do some tests. The first came in 1982 and it wasn't successful. They tried again in 84, and again the results were not good. Then they tried in 85, and yet again a message was sent back to Moscow saying things hadn't gone as planned. This was not what the bigwigs wanted to hear, and they made that known. The pressure was on. Excuse the pun. The reactor had already been slowed down to run at about 25% of its normal power. Importantly, the reactor's emergency core cooling system had been disabled, so it didn't get in the way of seeing if the turbines can power the generators. More importantly, some of the night shift workers that have arrived...
But what were they trying to do with, like, were they trying to harness nuclear power or something?
More importantly, some of the night shift workers that have arrived haven't been properly briefed about the test. The reason is the test should have happened on the day shift, but there was a power outage earlier in the day at a coal plant, so Chernobyl had to keep running at full power to give people their electricity. To fully appreciate this story, you need to know how we get the electricity from a nuclear power plant. So here we'll give you the very basics in layman terms.
Talk to me,
Inside the reactor, neutrons split uranium atoms, and that makes more neutrons. They split more atoms, and we have more neutrons, and so on and so on. This is a chain reaction, and it produces a crap load of heat. You harness the heat and make it turn water into steam, and the steam runs those turbines that we already talked about.
Steam?
As they move, all this energy becomes electricity that ensures people like Natasha can cook, clean, eat, see, watch TV, and stay warm in winter.
Humans
all
are
that
low-key
heat and energy, of course, can be a bit unstable, so you have to control mechanisms to make sure there isn't an overload. If not, the chain reactions would just keep going and become highly dangerous. Control rods are the things used to slow down the chain reactions. These are a bunch of rods that can be inserted into the reactor in different numbers or in different lengths, allowing the nuclear technicians to control the rate of the nuclear chain reaction. They're made out of special materials that can absorb neutrons, so if all does suddenly go to hell, you will at least hope these rods can come and save the day. No one at Chernobyl doubts their safety, or at least the less experienced operators don't. Hour 1. Now, you know the night shift isn't properly prepared for the test, and it might be their fault that the power out of the plant falls too much at 28 minutes past midnight on April 26th. They try to increase power, but something's wrong. They've never seen this before.
What?
This is partly because there's been a buildup of xenon during the test. You don't need to know what xenon is, and to be frank, it's too complicated to fully explain.
I ain't gonna lie, what am I even
there's a
looking at,
buildup of the stuff, it can cause xenon poisoning. Xenon would usually burn away when the reactor is at full power, but the slowdown has caused a buildup, and the buildup has caused a further slowdown. This is not good. It's because of this overabundance of xenon that even when the guys take
hold on. So the reactor has to continue performing at optimal levels. Otherwise, if it slows down, things will build up, and that's not good.
200 from 206. They still can't get enough power. As you know, by taking out the rods, they should get more power since the nuclear reaction isn't hampered.
Yeah.
Doing this, though, can be pretty dangerous. In fact, they shouldn't be doing this in the first place. A young operator gets on the phone and asks, "What shall I do?" In the program, there are instructions of what to do, and then a lot of things are crossed out. The guy on the other end pauses and says, "Follow the crossed out instructions." Hour 2. At around 1:05 a.m., they have power stabilized, although the reactor is running well below what the shift supervisor, Anatoly Dyatlov, thinks is ideal. One day, he'll lie and say he wasn't in the room when mistakes were made, but he was. Don't forget his name. The reactor is certainly running at less power than is safe for a test, but they carry on anyway on the orders of Dyatlov. He doesn't want a black mark against his name in the form of another failed test. At 1:24 and 4 seconds, the test really starts, meaning they're going to simulate a power outage, and as we have explained, see if the slowing turbines can power the coolant pumps before the generators can turn on. This is when all hell breaks loose. What happens is a sudden and massive increase in power. It is dangerously high, and this is now very serious. So serious that someone hits the scram button. At Chernobyl, this was the AZ5 button. It's an emergency off switch, which makes all the control rods drop down to stop the nuclear reactions. This is a big mistake, and one which exposes a few of the design flaws at Chernobyl. The rods have a graphite tip, which in short actually increases the reaction rate, not the opposite as wanted. The boron in the rods reduces reactivity, but not the tips. As so many rods hit the reactor at the same time, there's a huge surge in reactivity. The operators don't know what they've done. The graphite tips are fixed in position, and the heat creates a massive amount of hot steam, in effect, a bomb. The operators are not aware of this, or they wouldn't have dropped the rods into the reactor already surging with power. The man in the reactor hall watches as this happens and is shocked to see those 200 rods and their caps, each weighing 772 pounds, jumping up and down with the reactor lid. It's as if they're being pushed by the power of God. The output of the reactor is now at 10 times the power it should be, and that's it. Bang. The bomb goes off. The world will never be the same again after this moment. The explosion causes the reactor's steel lid weighing...
That's what it looked... Yo, that is honestly way bigger than I thought it'd be.
10,000 tons, or 2,000 medium-sized male African elephants, to fly off and go straight through the roof. Shortly after, there's another big explosion, likely down to a buildup of hydrogen from zirconium steel reactions. Bits of radioactive material and fuel are sent everywhere. Fires rage and the core is exposed to
everybody in that power plant was dead, bro.
It's not obvious to most of the men in the plant what's happening. They all think the reactor is still intact, only because reactors normally don't just blow up. The roof is destroyed, the floor is in pieces, radioactive materials are lying about everywhere. The air is filled with clouds of dust. Pieces of radioactive graphite are flung great distances, and radiation is now spilling into the atmosphere. To say this is bad would be putting it lightly. Soon a few men will know this, but one that knows it best will be too dead to tell the story. Right now, Alexander is in a state of shock. Just a moment ago, he was in his office with some colleagues reading some documents, but now everything around them is shuddering on the brink of what feels like imminent collapse. His first thought is, this is war. The USA has attacked us.
So they didn't think the reactor exploded?
What else could have happened? The phone rings. It's the guys from building number 3. Bring some stretchers, they shout over the noise. Alexander takes off down some dark corridors in search of the men he knows are the closest to the explosion site. As he gets closer to a deafening hissing sound, he finds his buddy. His face is horribly disfigured, so much so that he knows only who it is when he hears the sound of his voice. More people are injured, the guy tells Alexander. He then meets with Yuri Triga, who's come from control room number 4. He tells Alexander that Dyatlov has asked for the emergency high-pressure coolant water to flood the area. Dyatlov still doesn't know that the reactor has blown, and he won't even believe it when he's told. Now waist-deep in water, Alexander and a few other men try to get to the coolant taps, but through the door they see the giant water containers have been blown apart. All the men are terrified. This is worse than they thought. Alexander looks around at what's left of the room and sees his colleague Kodyemchuk on the floor, dead. He then looks up at the roof, or where the roof was. and he sees something magical, a great beam of light reaching to the heavens. It's magnificent and beautiful.
What is it?
And as things now stand, Alexander is not aware of how deadly it is. For a few seconds, he just stares at what he doesn't know are gamma rays and neutrons. A more experienced colleague who knows what it is grabs him by the shoulder and pulls him away, likely saving his life doing so. Alexander sets off to the control room number 4, and there he meets the other guys who've been ordered by Dyatlov to go to the reactor hall and lower the control rods by hand. This is madness.
That's where the Hulk became the Hulk.
Alexander screams, there is no reactor hall. The reactor has blown up. There are no control rods. They've blown up too. There's nothing left but space. The guys think he's crazy. Reactors don't explode. Alexander has to admit what he's seen. He's only seen from the bottom floor. The men tell him he needs to assess the damage from above to really know what's happened. The 4 of them head to the reactor hall upper floor. Little do they know this is a journey to the end of the night for 3 of them anyway. How does he know all this? As you know, Alexander only survives because he's the one that holds the door,
like he was there, bro.
Of the 4. When the guys come out, they say nothing can be done. They look at Alexander and tell him he's right. They say the reactor hall now looks like a volcano crater. They understand that radiation levels are high. Of course they do, it's their job. But they don't know just how high. They look at the radiation level reader device they have, the dosimeter, and that needle is off the scales. But they still don't know how bad they are because what is happening is so unprecedented. It's still only just after 1:55, but the firefighters are already outside on the scene. They too don't have much of an idea of the gravity of the situation, and they start and try to put out some of the fires that have started in various places. They're not even wearing protective clothing. Some of them will die in agony very soon. Others will pass away in a month, their immune systems destroyed by the radiation. Back in Pripyat, most people are in bed asleep, although a few are now standing outside. Mesmerized by the ethereal beam in the sky they don't know is caused by irradiated air. They just think it looks cool.
Nah, that's an explosion.
In the years to come, stories told in the West will say there was a large group of them on a bridge watching radioactive blue dust fall like snowflakes. This will be called the Bridge of Death. The stories will say they all died, but none of that is true. There was no Bridge of Death. Most people were asleep at the time. In the end, most people who were close to the accident recovered, with just 20% of those who suffered acute radiation poisoning biting the dust. As you'll see again in this show, it sometimes pays not to believe everything you see on TV or in the newspapers. If you don't know, the way radiation poisoning works on the body is it takes out electrons from atoms in a person's molecules, destroying the chemical bonds and thus damaging tissue. We don't need to tell you that this is not good for the person. In short, after an hour or two, diarrhea and vomiting can occur as tissue in the GI tract breaks down and bacteria is let loose on the body. Bone marrow stops producing white blood cells and infections can't be fought. Since the person's immune system is incredibly weak, without an immune system, your countless bacteria eat you from within. This might take some time, so even though the person is covered in blisters and ulcers, they could start to feel okay after a couple days. But then a blood infection might lead to a deadly sepsis. For some at Chernobyl, even a blood transfusion and bone marrow transplant won't help them. One of the townspeople is Lyudmila Ignatenko. She's already awake and has seen the glow. Her husband, Vasily, is currently fighting the fires. The two are due to have a child in 2 months.
Oh, God.
Fast forward a week and his skin is covered in boils, and when he turns on his pillow, he leaves skin and hair behind. The lesions spread out, and some of his skin now looks like a white film. At one point, he asks Lyudmila for a mirror, but when he sees his own disfigured face, he cries out in horror. Vasily will be buried in a zinc casket under cement, his body still radioactive. Lyudmila is lucky she even got to see him. A nurse told her it was too dangerous. She looked at Lyudmila and warned, if you start crying, I'll kick you out right away. No hugging or kissing, don't even get near him. You have half an hour. Lyudmila will have much to say about this in time to come. She'll also lose the child. It'll be born with a congenital heart defect and liver cirrhosis and will die after a few hours. Many people will criticize her for this, asking why she visited her dying husband. The radiation from him contaminated her and the fetus,
That's what I'm saying.
But you can't just catch radiation from a cleaned person, and there's no proof this is how the baby died. A falsity that will be talked about for years is the baby somehow took the radiation, and that saved her. This is not scientific at all, but it makes a good newspaper copy and great TV.
Not facts.
The consequences of this misinformation will mean the lives and lights of hundreds of thousands of babies are put out before they get going. We should say, though, that while seeing her dying husband wasn't the reason for the baby dying, it was very likely radiation exposure from somewhere else that led to the death. Back in 1986, the nurse that told Lyudmila not to touch her husband couldn't have known radiation doesn't spread to people after they've been cleaned and are out of their contaminated clothes. It's not contagious. We should also tell you that a person's hand can't suddenly burn when they touch the hand of a contaminated person. That's TV, not reality. One of the firefighters
Hey, I like
turns
how
to his
he's
friend and
he's
jokes,
putting
saying,
a clear
"There must be an
distinction between
incredible
that's
amount of
TV, not
radiation here.
reality.
We'll
I
be
like
lucky
that.
if
I like
we
that
are
a
all
lot.
still alive in the morning." As the survivors will later testify, they were never told the reactor was on fire, only that there were regular fires to put out. Some of them kicked the radioactive blocks, even picking them up with their hands after they doused them. They would have never done those things had they known the truth.
Yeah.
One of the firefighters who survived explained how little they knew, saying some of his colleagues went up to the roof to work from there. Soberingly, he said, then those boys who died went up to the roof. Vashchik, Kolya, and others. Volodya Pravik, they went up to the ladder and I never saw them again.
Damn.
Hour 3.
Damn.
Local officials have already arrived on the scene to discuss what's happening. When they're told, they're not told the entire truth. That's because only a handful of people right now truly understand that the reactor has blown up, and some of them are now burned, vomiting. So not in a meeting explaining what they've seen. Dialov still thinks what he always has, that a water tank is blown up and the radiation currently making some people very sick is from contaminated water. He just can't believe that the core would blow, even though some people are starting to realize that a water tank blowing up wouldn't lead to so much destruction.
But why does he refuse to believe that the core didn't blow up?
The fires. The last thing anyone wants is Reactor 3 to set on fire, which is looking like a possibility. It's soon safely shut down, but Reactors 1 and 2 keep going until the next day. Inside Reactor 4 is now a molten reactor core, a large graphite and concrete slag that's burning at around 1200 degrees Celsius.
Damn.
Hour 5. Another meeting is held.
Nigga, 1200 degrees Celsius?
Reactor 4 is now a molten reactor core, a large graphite and concrete slag that's burning at around 1200 degrees Celsius.
Is Chernobyl still radioactive?
Another meeting is held.
That'd be a kind of a fun place to visit,
ask about the high levels of radiation, proffering a theory that the core might have blown.
If it is, will a hazmat suit protect me?
Even though he's not far from keeling over himself. A second later, he throws up. A decision's made that no one will leave the town. Not yet. Perhaps they can be evacuated in 3 days. All the phone lines are blocked in case anyone starts spreading rumors, which one official calls misinformation that can negatively affect the Soviet Union. Police soon start blocking roads, just as soldiers pass them on their way to help with the cleanup job. Hour 7.
So they're purposely keeping
a.m. most of the fires are out.
In a radioactive
but by no means
area.
Does this mean the problems are over? They're only just beginning. Real horror is taking place inside that reactor. A man who understands this horror is Valery Legasov, the deputy director of the Kurchatov Institute of Atomic Energy, and the man that will lead the commission to deal with the accident. He'll also be the one that testifies during the tribunal, and as you'll see, he's the guy that exposes the Soviet Union's shortcomings when it comes to producing nuclear energy. Hour 8. He's called on the phone. Soon, he's at the airport with the man who will manage the crisis, Boris Sherbina. In time, both these men will suffer from radiation poisoning, but for now, they still don't know exactly what happened. Hour 13. It's around midday when they attend the meeting to discuss matters. Legasov already knows about the people in the hospital suffering from severe radiation burns, so he and others agree the town needs to be evacuated. Hour 30. Legasov is driven in an armored personnel carrier to assess the damage for himself. It's bad, very bad. He says they have to get that main fire under control or radiation will be taken by the wind for many, many miles. Many parts of Europe, not just Ukraine, are at risk. This is a disaster of unbelievable
proportions. Bro, the wind can carry the radiation? What? Oh, bro.
Says they have to get that main fire under control or radiation will be taken by the wind for many, many miles. Many parts of Europe, not just Ukraine, are at risk. This is a disaster of unbelievable proportions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's agreed that dropping sand and boron on the reactor fire from helicopters might be the best way to go, even though Legasov knows it might not work. They have no choice, he says. Something needs to be done right now. The military will help with the cleanup, and many men will be expected to risk their lives. These people will become known as the liquidators, and many of them will suffer long-term health effects from their work.
Seriously?
Hour 33. Sherbina gets on the phone with Moscow and reports, "We've measured the radiation. Pripyat needs to be evacuated immediately. The station is close by, and it's emitting radioactive contagion, and people in the city are living it up full blast. Weddings are going on." Levels of radioactivity in the town are rising at an alarming rate. Earlier in the day, the level was between 14 and 140 milliröntgens per hour, but that's gone up to 180 to 300 milliröntgens, and in areas closer to the plant, 600. 50 milliröntgens or more per year can be dangerous, with 400 milliröntgens per year killing you. The people in that town now have a much higher risk of developing cancer, and they have no idea about it. Still, in parts of the plant, the level has reached an astounding 20,000 milliröntgens per hour.
What?
Still, in parts of the plant, the level has reached an astounding 20,000 milliröntgens per hour, and that's why some men died so soon after exposure. Hour 36. Sometime in the morning, the first helicopters start dropping the sand and boron on the fire. It's a perilous job. Getting too close to the hole where the reactor was can lead to acute radiation sickness.
Damn.
It's dangerous enough anyway, as can be seen when one helicopter collides with a chain and crashes, killing the men on board. Hour 38. The evacuation begins. From speakers all over the town comes a woman's voice, saying the same thing over and over again. Attention, attention. In connection with the accident at the Chernobyl atomic power station, unfavorable radiation conditions are developing in the city of Pripyat. In order to ensure complete safety for residents, children first and foremost, it has become necessary to carry out a temporary evacuation.
All right.
They're told to take everything with them
hour
that's
38
important,
though?
including all their personal documents. They don't know it, but they're never going back to their homes. Just
Dang.
1 hour before this announcement, families were enjoying the weekend. In the cafeteria, in the shopping mall, kids and their mothers were hanging out and eating ice cream.
Pripyat like a good
For them,
place
it
to
was
live
just
in?
a normal day. There were kids playing on the bumper cars. Then suddenly, they were told the ride was over. Now they're taken aback when they hear the speakers say, "Comrades, on leaving your dwellings, please do not forget to close windows, switch off electrical and gas appliances, and turn off water taps. Please remain calm, organized, and orderly."
Dang,
What's
what
startling
would
is
y'all
these
do
people
if y'all
have
heard
not
that
been
on
told the full story
in America,
and
bro?
certainly aren't given any
Where would we
protective
even
clothing,
go?
in spite of the fact that
Who would
Soviet
take
officials
us?
know about the dangerous levels of radiation. So far, they don't want to cause too much panic, or for the word to get out about the disaster. Hour 42. Sherbina calls Premier Nikolai Ryshkov and explains there are no people left in Pripyat. There are only dogs running around. What happens to the mutts in the end is
dogs?
awful.
They left the animals? Why?
Sherbina calls Premier
Bro,
Nikolai
if you pull up
Ryshkov
to there,
and
them
explains
dogs is
there
gonna
are
be
no people
demon
left in
dogs and shit
Pripyat.
like that.
There are only dogs running around. What happens to the mutts in the end is awful, but that's a few days away yet. Sherbina's not exactly correct about all the people leaving. Some young folks have hidden so they can stay together in their parents' apartments and get it on for once with some
Dummies,
privacy. They don't care much about some little radiation leak. Old folks too have stayed behind, or some of them have. They're well past the age of moving away, and they're too tough to worry about radiation. Some have lived well through wars, famine, and Stalin's reign of terror.
Hey,
Hour 46.
you know what I'm saying?
116,000 people have left. About 1,200 have stayed behind.
1,200 people
mostly
stayed
the
behind?
aged and many of them women. Babushkas, as they say in Russian. They have refused
Babushkas.
to budge. But it's hard to argue with a stubborn babushka. One woman,
Babushka.
Hanna Zavorotnya, is given a stern order to leave after she's been found by a soldier.
That's a
She looks him
babushka,
square
bruh.
in the face and says, "Shoot us and dig the grave, otherwise we're staying." After listening to the soldier
Damn.
explain the danger, she replies, "Radiation doesn't scare me, starvation does." Determined
Is
to try to
she
keep matters
wrong?
within a fairly small circle.
Kind of.
The KGB is told to stop the spread of panicky rumors and unreliable information getting out, although nothing they can do to prevent what happens next. Hour 52. The Soviets
Hour
get word
52.
that Sweden has detected radiation, and it has been identified as coming from Chernobyl. On top of this, soon the USA will have satellite photos of the disaster. The news carries as fast as the radiation, with presenters all over the world telling people that this major accident, something that's never happened before on this scale, could mean dangerous radiation being carried from Ukraine to other European cities. As the children of
Jesus.
Chernobyl settle into their new surroundings, school kids in Germany are kept home in fear of radiation poisoning. Panic reverberates from North America back to Europe and into Asia. Hour 55. It's not until the evening that the official news is shown on Russian TV. A report states there's been an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. One of the nuclear reactors was damaged. The effects of the accident are being remedied. Assistance has been provided for any affected people. An investigative commission has been set up. More Russian news follows, and this time with in-depth discussions. Not surprisingly, experts talk about the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident of the USA and some other American nuclear mishaps.
I love you wanna go?
What the news doesn't talk about is what could happen at Chernobyl right now. A new kind of disaster could be in the works. Hour 58. It was thought the water tanks were empty, which isn't actually the case. To make things worse, fire hoses have been filling the place with more water. Soviet scientists are now saying that if the smoldering graphite, remember heated to about 1200 degrees Celsius,
Yeah,
hits
I
the
remember.
water, there could be another massive explosion,
What?
even bigger than the last one.
What?
That could mean Europe being hit with more radiation. They don't know it yet, but it's highly unlikely this explosion will happen. They think it could, and so tell 3 men who know the area inside and out that they'll have to drain the 20,000 tons of water through a sluice gate. These men know that there's a good chance they might not make it out, and even if they do, they might not live very long after. Hence the name the Chernobyl Suicide Squad. Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespolov, and Boris Baranov. Hour 60. Finding the valves in the dark is like...
I ain't gonna lie to you, bro. That would be a movie. That would be a movie, bro. Because the fact that they were even willing to do this, knowing that they probably might not even make it out, they deserve some type of like accolade or something, bro. Did they survive?
Hence the name the Chernobyl Suicide Squad. Alexei Ananenko,
like, look how hard they look, bro. They look
Boris
cool as hell.
Hour 60. Finding the valves in the dark is like finding a needle in a haystack, but they do it in the end. For them, it's just another day at work. They knew they'd be fired if they didn't do as asked, and unlike what will be said in years to come, they didn't get any reward for their work. As we've explained, there will be a lot of Western misinformation flying about in regard to the Chernobyl disaster. One falsity told time and again is that these 3 men all died shortly after they succeeded in their mission. But they didn't. They lived long, healthy lives after their time in the darkness of Chernobyl.
Ow.
Hour 66. The Soviet government is now worried that the molten core will burn through the cement and get to the groundwater, thereby contaminating it and spreading radiation to the rest of Ukraine and into Europe, possibly making some places uninhabitable. A mining team is brought in to dig a huge tunnel below the reactor to act as a cooling system, and they're given respirators for the work, but it's hard to breathe with them on. It's also very hot, but they don't work naked, as will be told in TV in the future. Again, it's a big job and a risky job for the 400 or so miners.
Yeah.
The Soviets don't have to be too concerned because the core won't melt through the concrete. Obviously, they don't know that yet and have to take all precautions. Hour 100. The debris removal starts. At first, the 100 tons of radioactive material is said to be so dangerous that the men shouldn't go near it. They opt to use robots, but most of the robots break as soon as deployed due to radiation. The liquidators are chosen to do the job.
Even affects
men who are
robots?
now camping close to the plant. Thousands of them are there, and in time, 600,000 or so of them will help with the cleanup. They're given protective clothing, but still told they shouldn't stay on the roof longer than 40 to 90 seconds, since the graphite and other materials up there are about as radioactive as you can get. Of the 5,000 men who do the job, some will go up as many as 6 times, but it's hard to say how many will have health problems because of it.
Yeah.
Alexander, as you know, survives. He's flown to Moscow, his hair falls out and he finds it hard to breathe.
Damn.
His eyes, nose, and most of his face hurts. But then after a couple days, he and the other men all start to feel pretty good. As you already know, this doesn't mean they are
it don't
good.
mean that
One
they're
day,
chilling,
he's in
though.
pain again, and he pulls back his bed sheets to see massive ulcers and necrotic skin on his shoulder, hip, and calf.
What?
All the bits exposed when he held the door open. He's turning black and feels like he's a monster, telling himself he looks like some kind of radioactive mutant. Luckily for him, his body accepts the skin grafts, and blood transfusions and bone marrow transplants do the rest. His arm is in really bad shape and will stay in bandages for years. In the hospital, every so often, someone walks into the room and tells him another of his colleagues is dead.
Damn.
One of them first goes blind, and then the infection in his blood finishes him off. For 2 months, Alexander lies in bed close to death, thinking about how it'll be when it's his turn to die. He will later be awarded medals for his bravery, but once he's better, he'll keep his Chernobyl experience mostly to himself. For many years to come, people in this part of the world will cross the street if they see a Chernobyl survivor walking toward them. These people, not educated about radiation, wrongly assume the survivors are contaminated. Fear has devastating consequences. Soon after the disaster, there are 150,000 elective abortions. Chernobyl, in fact, will make much of the world wrongly overestimate the dangers of producing nuclear power. This will go on for decades and is still a factor in some people's minds today when they think about nuclear energy. What or who is to blame for the disaster is the question that the Soviets and many other countries will be asking for some time to come. The investigations at the start will mostly blame human error rather than technical error.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Pick out a few names to shame and send to prison, such as Mr. Dyatlov. Sure,
he's
he
still
messed
alive,
up a bit, as did others at the plant. But the fault lies in many people, going right up to the top brass in the communist government.
100%
1 year later, it's now 1987, and Legasov is very ill from radiation poisoning and is in and out of the hospital all the time.
Yeah.
He knows he's going to die, so he records himself on tape telling the whole truth about how and why this disaster happened. Part of the tape goes, "The Chernobyl disaster is an apotheosis, the pinnacle of all the mismanagement that has been carried out for decades in our country. When one looks at the chain of events, why someone acted in this way and another in that way and so on, it's impossible to point to a single culprit, an initiator of all the unpleasant events that led to the crime, because it's a chain that links to itself." He finishes off by warning that as he speaks, the Soviet Union does not have a safe nuclear power plant. Not because of the production of energy is dangerous in itself, but because too many mistakes have been made and too many corners have been cut. He said when you can't hold the state accountable, then the state is broken. 2 years later, in 1988, the day after the second anniversary of the accident, he is found dead in his apartment. Sherbina, who'd become a close friend, said Valery was too great. I loved him more than all the people I knew. He gave all of himself to work, to Chernobyl.
Found dead? Like,
he
what was
burnt
the
out.
cause of death?
Of 237 people that suffered acute radiation sickness, 31 died within a couple of months.
Oh.
The amount of people that died from cancer due to radiation poisoning reached around 4,000, and many more survived cancer.
Okay.
Still, the health effects of the disaster have been argued about for many years. As for Reactor 4, it was covered with a giant steel and concrete building called the sarcophagus containment structure. An exclusion zone was formed, covering an area of around 1,000 square miles of Ukraine. Over the years, the town of Pripyat became home to life again, but the wild animal kind, not the human kind. 20 years later. After all those pet dogs and cats, they were killed by special teams not long after the disaster became worldwide knowledge.
Because they emitted radiation?
Some may have survived, though, because in the years to come, dogs in the town will be seen alongside wolves, brown bears, deer, badgers, lynx, bison, and moose. In 20,000 years, the town of Pripyat might be safe again for humans to go and live there. You can visit now, but experts recommend you don't eat the wild mushrooms or other plants you can find there.
Why would I do that?
And wear something you're prepared to throw away later. Radiation sucks, but we can't live without it. Now you need to watch What If.
We're going to Chernobyl. He literally said we could visit. Like, we're chilling, we're good. Bro, that would be the greatest video ever. We have 2 places we need to go to. North Korea and Chernobyl so far. We gotta write them down. Those are tribe goals, you feel me? We're not gonna go there to be dumb or stupid. We're simply going there because, why are we going there? We're going to Chernobyl just because I want to explore that area. I feel like it'd be very interesting just to see that area. The dude that presented this, great way of presenting information. This video is great. I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot too. This was great. This is fantastic. Should we do some more? The elephant's foot, corpse of Chernobyl.
200 seconds.
What?
200 seconds next to it would lead to a relatively quick death, which is better than many alternatives. Spend just 30 seconds near it, and dizziness and fatigue would find you a week later. 2 minutes of exposure, and your cells would soon begin to hemorrhage. 4 minutes, vomiting, diarrhea, fever. 200 seconds in its presence, and you would have just days to live.
Jeez. Half-Life History's Corpse of Chernobyl, the elephant's foot.
By the fall of 1986, emergency crews fighting to contain the nuclear disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant made it into the basement. They turned a corner into a steam corridor beneath failed reactor number 4 and found not steam, but black lava that had oozed out of the core, eaten through meters of concrete, and settled on the floor.
Black lava?
The largest and most famous formation in the corridor was a 2-ton wrinkled mass that their radiation sensors firmly told them not to approach. With cameras pushed in from around a corner, the workers documented the dimly lit mass. According to readings taken at the time, the still hot portion of the molten reactor core was putting out enough radiation to give anyone within 3 feet of it a lethal dose in just 200 seconds.
Damn.
This is the true story of the elephant's foot.
That's a hard name for a piece of black lava adapted for 2013.
During a routine test on April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant experienced a power surge born of poor reactor design and human error, which triggered an emergency shutdown.
Yeah, scram.
The shutdown did not work.
Nah, it made it worse.
The attempt to manage the surge in power and alarming increase in the core's temperature caused an even larger power surge of 12,000%. Control rods that are used to manage core temperature were inserted too late. A gross safety violation, there weren't even enough control rods in the core to begin with.
12,000.
Their insertion into the increasingly hot core caused the rods themselves to crack and fracture, locking them in place. Heat and power output continued to rise until the water that was used to cool the entire reactor began to vaporize, generating massive amounts of pressure.
Jesus.
The first explosion from the steam inside the reactor was large enough to send a 4 million pound lid of the reactor assembly through the roof of the building. The reactor now fatally
4 million pounds? What?
The remaining cooling water from broken channels was large enough to send a 4 million pound lid of the reactor assembly through the roof of the building. The reactor now fatally damaged, the remaining cooling water from broken channels seeped into the reactor as well, flashing directly into steam as it touched the soon-to-be glowing hot nuclear fuel rods. A second, even more massive explosion followed shortly after the first, belching core material into the air, spreading fire and radioactive ash. It is estimated that the fires that rage in Reactor 4 spread 400 times more radiation than the nuclear blast that wiped Hiroshima off the map. Over 160,000 square kilometers of Russia and Europe were eventually contaminated.
Are you serious?
With a glowing heart no longer shielded by tons of steel and concrete, the core could no longer be cooled. It began to melt. When you hear about a nuclear reactor melting down, it's not simply illustrative language. Without proper cooling, radioactive materials used as fuel get hotter and hotter due to their close proximity and continuous emission of high-energy particles. Nuclear fuel literally heats itself up until it melts, turning into what is arguably the most dangerous substance on Earth.
Corium.
If you wanted to know what the most dangerous material ever created was, corium would be a good answer. At Chernobyl, the loss of coolant caused a meltdown of the uranium fuel, up to a third of which was scattered into the atmosphere. Estimates vary, but up to 160,000 kilograms of uranium, radioactive in many thousands of degrees, melted and flowed into the bottom of the reactor vessel.
Okay.
8 days later, the flow had melted through the reactor's lower shield. Oozing through basement pipes, pooling in steam corridors, and eating through 2 meters of steel and concrete, the radioactive lava flow from reactor number 4 eventually cooled enough to solidify in the basement. Thousands of kilograms of molten uranium oxide, sand, metal, silica glass, and other materials, a composite monstrosity dubbed corium. In addition to being the world's arguably most dangerous material, it might be also the rarest artificial material.
Really?
Corium is only formed in a nuclear meltdown. Corium has only been created accidentally 5 times. Once in the 3 Mile Island reactor in Pennsylvania in 1979, once at Chernobyl, and 3 separate times during the much more recent Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. Now I say accidentally created because there are scientists and engineers who study corium and create it on purpose. For example, this is a video of molten uranium oxide, like what would have been found beneath Chernobyl, bubbling and boiling at around 2,000 degrees Celsius at Argonne National Laboratory. Remember, this heat is self-generated. All by itself, corium can get half as hot as the surface of the sun. Corium is never pure nuclear fuel. Rather, it's a radioactive Frankenstein of fuel rods, fission products, the control rods in the core, concrete from the floor, steel from the surrounding structures, and the chemicals created when blazing uranium reacts with air, water, and steam. Here you can see a simulation of what corium actually does, easily disintegrating concrete as it
That's what I'm thinking, yo. I'm like, is this
confinement?
Is it disintegrating
in the lab,
all of
corium is still terrifying but controlled and mesmerizing in a way that lava and its destructive capabilities can often be. It's almost beautiful. At Chernobyl, there was no such beauty.
Yeah, I was about to say,
After the corium was done flowing, the result was an ominous collection of stalactites, stalagmites, steam valves clogged with hardened radioactive lava, and the large gray mass that would later be dubbed the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot could be the most dangerous piece of waste in the world. Of the 5 accidental corium creations, only Chernobyl's has escaped confinement.
What? Oh, okay.
Radioactive atoms are unstable atoms. While something like hydrogen is just fine with a nucleus consisting of a single proton, radioactive elements like uranium, the most common isotope of which contains 92 protons and 146 neutrons, are not so happy. Photons, electrons, protons, and neutrons are randomly ejected from the nuclei of these large atoms, transforming them until something like plutonium degrades over time into a stable element like lead. Particles emitted from radioactive atoms are a form of ionizing radiation. That is, they have enough energy to rip apart the atoms and molecules they crash into, changing how they interact with other atoms and molecules, ionizing them. Non-ionizing radiation, on the other hand, like the kind emitted by your cell phone, does not have enough energy to break atomic bonds. Ionizing radiation, then, directly causes the terrible symptoms of radiation sickness by simply smashing through enough molecular machinery in your body. DNA can be repaired, new cells can be generated, but with enough nanoscopic damage, cells start to function irregularly or die outright, leading to cancer or organ failure, respectively.
Necrosis.
Because of the way radiation
Apoptosis?
damages human cells by knocking atoms and molecules out of
What am I
place,
even looking at,
death
bro?
by radiation is a, relatively speaking, slow one. Fever, nausea, confusion, cancer, organ failure.
Are these
Up
cells
to
or
a
something?
point, over time, treatment does help, but extremely high doses of radiation, like the kind that would be delivered by close contact with the elephant's foot, are always a death sentence. The more radiation released from a mass of atoms,
This
the
is
more
insane.
dangerous it is. The elephant's foot was emitting nearly 10,000 Röntgens per hour.
What?
It only takes about 1/10 of that rate to kill a person. A single hour next to the elephant's foot would expose you to the equivalent of over 4.5 million chest x-rays all at once. Shortly after the Chernobyl meltdown, nearly 600,000 workers descended on the site to help contain the escaping radiation. Knowingly or not, many of these workers were making the greatest sacrifice. 134 were hospitalized with acute radiation syndrome. 28 of them died within months following the incident,
Damn.
and current estimates put the total number of deaths from related cancers due to the contamination across Russia and Europe somewhere between 9 and 16,000.
Jesus, bro. These folks just literally died for breathing.
After the nuclear fires at Chernobyl were finally controlled, a feat which took 9 full days, workers scrambled to contain the invisible dangers of the failed core. In May of 1986, construction began on the sarcophagus, a gigantic concrete enclosure built to seal off the radiation from the outside world.
Did it work? It
The
had to
ruins
have...
would never be entirely contained, even after the installation of a much larger tomb
Damn.
in 2016. The Chernobyl sarcophagus is outfitted with access points, allowing researchers to observe the core and workers to enter. In December of 1986, researchers discovered the elephant's foot. It was a couple of meters across, over 4,000 kilograms, and put out enough radiation to prevent anyone from getting near it for more than just a few seconds.
I wonder if it's still emitting
But
radiation.
despite the dangers, we have pictures like this one.
That's what I'm
of the deadly
saying.
mass.
How?
Well, from a safe distance, workers, or liquidators as they were called, rigged up a crude wheeled camera contraption and pushed it slowly and from around a corner towards the elephant's foot.
Okay.
This photo, almost never seen in discussions of the elephant's foot, was taken in 1990, 4 years after the incident. The slide the photo is on was given to a Dr. Bill Zoller
It is
at the University of Washington's Department
low-key
of
smaller
Chemistry.
than
The
it
caption
looks.
reads, quote, "This is a slide I obtained from the Russians. It shows what is called the elephant's foot. The Russians obtained this picture by sending a man down there with a camera. He took one picture and then came back up. I was told that he died from the radiation he had received. This picture cost a man his life." End quote. When this photo of the elephant's foot was taken, 10 years after the disaster, the elephant's foot was only emitting 1/10 of the radiation it once had been.
Oh, wow.
Still, merely 500 seconds of exposure at this level would bring on mild radiation sickness, and a little over an hour of exposure would be fatal. Another photo, a timed selfie by Russian nuclear inspector Artur Korneyev, is arguably the most famous and most disturbing photo
what are
of the elephant's foot.
Those
According
flares.
to an investigation by Atlas Obscura, the ghostly image of Artur is likely not due to anything spooky, just the shutter speed, as is
I was
the
about to say,
time-lapse-like
what in
streak
the
from
world?
the flashlight. But the grittiness you see in the photo, that's from the radiation.
That's from the radiation?
From the flashlight. But the grittiness you see in the photo, that's from the radiation. Over time, the elephant's foot has decomposed. It has puffed dust while its surface cracked, but more than 30 years later, it is still quite dangerous. In 2001, levels were measured that would give you a lethal dose of radiation in under 60 minutes.
Jeez.
Extrapolating from how radiation sources degrade over time, today that deadly limit is probably a few hours. And today, the elephant's foot, once nuclear lava eating through the corpse of Chernobyl, is still hotter than the surrounding air temperature and environment thanks to the radioactive heat pulsing inside of it.
What? It's
Born of human error, continually generating heat in the basement of a failed power plant, the elephant's foot is still melting into the base of Chernobyl,
they got some good
albeit
footage of
very slowly. If it hits groundwater, scientists still worry that it could trigger another explosion like the one that killed the core and lifted 4 million pounds like it was a paperweight, or it could leach radioactive material into the water that nearby residents drink. Long after bleeding from the core, this unique piece of waste continues to be a terrifying testament to the potential dangers of nuclear power, even though nuclear power as a whole is extremely safe. Until it is finally removed, if it ever is, the elephant's foot will be there for centuries, sitting in the dark basement of a concrete and steel sarcophagus, a symbol of one of humankind's most powerful tools gone wrong. Until next time.
That's hard. That's hard. Elephant's foot is the hardest name though. I ain't gonna lie to you, that's hard. Why they came up with something so cool for such a horrible mistake, bro. Okay, whatever. That's America for you. Man, oh man. I hope y'all enjoyed that. I certainly did. I learned a lot today. Always happy to learn something, man. That's one of the things I'll probably say that will always be on the channel is me learning new things. I love learning new things. How else am I supposed to continue to elevate my mind? You should always be trying to learn new things too, because it's gonna get harder as you get older, and that's a fact. All right, enough of me. I'm gonna leave y'all be. It's your boy Tribe Loui. Gang. Yes.
Yeah, it's the end. Leave a like and share it to your friends and your kin. When I post a video, I'm gonna need y'all to attend. Thank you for the view, but I ain't done with you. 2023, I'm about to be Jordan with the flu. Yeah, join the tribe. Yeah, join the tribe. I'm gonna need y'all to subscribe.